Ended my 3-year relationship, made my jobless ex leave with his dog, and insisted he fix his financial mess. I am 23F and recently ended a nearly 3-year relationship with my boyfriend, 24M. When I finally ended things, I told him I wanted him out of my home by the time I got back that day. He packed up his belongings and left willingly. Since then, I've been criticized for being too harsh, especially when it comes to his dog and the financial mess he left behind. I find myself questioning whether my boundaries really were unreasonable. When we got together, we already knew each other, and I felt I could trust him. In the beginning, he'd just lost a job he'd held for about 4 years. Not too far into the relationship, he moved in with me, and we agreed, as soon as he found steady work, we'd split the expenses right down the middle. That never happened. Instead, I ended up covering everything week after week: rent, utilities, groceries, transportation, every household necessity. I kept paying, partly to keep my life stable, but also because I wanted to relieve any pressure so he could focus on finding work. The whole time we were together, he managed to find 3 jobs, and he only kept them for a total of maybe 6 or 7 months. The rest of those 3 years, I was the sole provider. I know I went way beyond my fair share just to hold our lives together. I put so much effort into being patient, supportive, and making things easy enough for him that he'd finally contribute. The balance never came. About a year ago, I discovered he'd been messaging other women online and trying to set up dates behind my back. That was the last straw. I ended things. We stayed broken up from November 2024 until February 2025. During that time, I felt independent again and so much less stressed. Eventually, we got back together when he swore things would be different. He'd apply for jobs consistently and help with bills, he promised. But as nearly a year passed, those promises proved empty. As I watched months slip by with no change, I told him openly that I needed to see some real effort, something as basic as job applications, because I was drowning both financially and emotionally. Still, nothing changed. I burned out. He had brought his dog to live with us early on, and he'd always insisted the dog was his, not mine. I made room for his dog in my home, trusting he'd always be there and take care of his own pet. But after the breakup, when he left, the dog stayed with me for a while. I agreed to take care of him temporarily, either until the food ran out or until the new year, so the dog wouldn't face a bad situation. Communication about the dog was spotty at best. He doesn't have stable housing now and kept asking for more time, but never provided any definite plans. The dog escaped once by managing to open a sliding glass door, and after that I had to keep him kenneled for his safety. The trouble is, I work brutal hours, often 56 to 70 hours a week, and while I'm away, the dog stays in his kennel. He hates it, cries for hours, and my neighbors are losing sleep. I am, too. It's not fair to the dog, and it's crystal clear this arrangement can't continue. I told him flat out that the dog can't stay past December 31st. I demanded he come up with a plan by December 29th. Either he or a family member has to pick up the dog, or I'll have to find him a new home or surrender him to a shelter so he can get the stability he deserves. Then there's the financial and property mess. Once, he lost a phone his parents paid for at a party I attended. I ended up buying a replacement on my own plan, taking on that expense because I felt responsible and wanted to help. Both the phone and its service are in my name, and regardless of whether I get the phone back, the account is stuck with me. When he left, he took his TV, and my Puffco device, claiming I'd given it as a gift. I tried to resolve things fairly. I told him he could either return the Puffco and TV if I kept paying the phone bill, or he could pay off the phone's remaining balance of $524.97 and take over the account so it was finally out of my name. I waited for a response so we could finish this, but he never gave one. There's also an unpaid traffic ticket. He got it while driving my car, which is still in my name and on my record. That car was repossessed, too, because it was the only bill I could afford to delay payment on to keep my housing and utilities from getting cut off. Looking back, I know I set firm boundaries based on my capacity, my finances, and my obligation to keep my own life together. I'm doing everything I can to resolve these leftover issues without bringing more instability or harm into anyone's life, even if it means making some tough calls. It isn't easy, but I know it's necessary. Update 1. Zeus was my ex-boyfriend's dog, and when we broke up, he left Zeus at my place as if the problem would just solve itself. I work long hours and already have my own dog. From the very beginning, I made it crystal clear I couldn't take care of Zeus forever. I kept telling my ex, both verbally and in writing, that he needed to come up with a real plan and set a firm date to pick up Zeus. I drew a hard line. After December 31st, I could not keep Zeus any longer. I repeated that more than once and gave him plenty of warning. I never moved that deadline or blindsided him. It was all laid out right from the start. But all I got from him were repeated pleas for more time, but never with any actual timeline, just empty promises and vague ideas, no real action. He always said he was saving up for a kennel and supplies, but then he'd also admit that if he took Zeus, the poor dog would have to live outside in some makeshift setup. He wasn't allowed to have pets indoors where he was staying. Zeus, a dog who had only ever lived indoors, was suddenly facing a future locked outside, exposed to the elements. The entire situation was even more stressful because of the chaos Zeus caused while under my care. He figured out how to open the doors himself, and managed to escape 3 separate times. Every time it happened, my day would be derailed. I had to stop everything I was doing to look for him, only for some kind stranger to eventually bring him back. I lost over 16 hours of work just trying to wrangle him or waiting for him to be found. One day, I thought I'd be kind and not kennel him, and of course, that was the day he had explosive diarrhea all throughout my home. The mess was so bad I had to deep clean every carpet, and I even had to throw out my $200 carpet cleaner because I couldn't get rid of all the bacteria and contamination. It was so much more than just a minor annoyance. There was a real financial impact, health risks, and an entirely new level of stress stacked on top of everything I was already dealing with. Zeus's health was another ongoing crisis. He had an untreated yeast infection in his ears, which was actually diagnosed months earlier while my ex still lived with me. We tried some drops, but when those didn't fix it, no one took him back to the vet. I simply wasn't able to take on the responsibility. Medical care for another dog was too much, both financially and logistically, especially with my 56 to 70-hour work weeks. Finally, after yet another ignored warning and no concrete plan, I set a final deadline for my ex and told him, outright, if I didn't have a plan from him by that date, Zeus would be surrendered to someone who could actually provide stable care. The deadline passed in silence. So, I kept my word. I surrendered Zeus to the Humane Society, a no-kill facility, so he'd actually get medical treatment, be supervised, and finally have a real shot at stability. Only after I told my ex did he finally respond, but by then Zeus was already in safe hands. My ex blew up at me, saying he just needed more time and called me unreasonable, but the decision was made after weeks of warnings, deadlines, and escalating emergencies. This wasn't an act of revenge. It was the last option after months of unpredictability, repeated escapes, destroyed property, real safety and health concerns, and the looming threat that Zeus would end up living in a backyard after a lifetime indoors. In the end, I did what I had to do for the dog, and for myself. Update 2. The night after I surrendered Zeus, there was banging on my door at 1:13 a.m. I woke up to my porch camera lighting up and my ex's voice carrying through the door like the walls were thinner than they are. He wasn't alone, his sister was with him. He kept saying I stole his dog and that I had to hand him over, right then. I didn't open the door. I called the non-emergency line and stayed on the phone while he paced and knocked and tried the handle. 2 officers showed up, and one of them stood on my porch while I talked through the door. They told him exactly what I'd already said. Zeus was with the Humane Society, he needed to contact them directly, and this was a civil matter. He started to argue, then tried to say I forged something, then switched to, just give me my Puffco and I'll go, like this was a trade. The officer shut that down. They left when he finally did. The next morning, I took a personal hour, changed my locks, and added a security bar to the sliding door Zeus used to open. The Humane Society called me that afternoon with an intake update. Zeus had double ear infections and a nasty yeast flare on his skin. They started him on meds and had him scheduled for a sedated ear flush the next morning because he was too painful to tolerate a full cleaning awake. He ate for them, drank, and let a tech hand feed him. By the end of the call, I was crying in my car in the parking lot at work, not because I regretted anything, but because it was the first confirmation from someone who wasn't me that he actually needed more than I could give. My ex did try to get Zeus back. He showed up at the shelter the same day I got the health update and made a scene in the lobby. The manager called me after, calm and apologetic, and said they placed a hold while they reviewed ownership. He couldn't produce veterinary records in his name or microchip information that matched him. The only vet paperwork they had on file was from when he and I lived together, with my address on it and notes about ear drops that weren't followed up on. They kept Zeus in medical hold and moved him into a foster home within 48 hours. On the money side, I stopped waiting for him to be reasonable. I'd sent him a certified letter laying out his 2 choices with the phone and the Puffco and gave him a week. It came back to me unopened. I suspended his line the same day. I got a string of texts from an unfamiliar number after that, accusations and then a picture of my own Puffco on a kitchen counter as if to bait me. I screenshotted everything and filed in small claims for the phone balance, the replacement carpet cleaner, and my filing fee. I left off the traffic ticket and the repossession because those are between me and the state and my lender. He did show up to court. He was 20 minutes late and tried to stroll in with a coffee like he was at a social call. The judge asked if he had proof he'd taken over the account, proof he'd paid anything on the balance, or proof the Puffco was a gift. He had nothing. I had printouts, the phone contract in my name, the payoff amount, the text where I told him he could either give the Puffco back or take the line and pay for it himself, pictures of the ruined carpet cleaner, and the receipts for the deep cleaning I had to do after the diarrhea incident. He tried to argue that the carpet cleaner was a luxury item and the mess was an accident, and the judge cut him off and asked him what, exactly, his contribution had been to any of this. There was a long silence. I won a judgment for the phone balance, the cleaner, and my fees. The clerk told me I could pursue wage garnishment or liens. It felt like being handed a lever I never had before. The part I didn't expect was his mom. That same night, she called me from a number I didn't recognize and asked to meet somewhere public. I said yes and picked a coffee shop near a police substation. She walked in looking tired in a way that wasn't about sleep. She told me he'd told the whole family I dumped his dog in a kill shelter and stole a bunch of his things. Then he tried to call her from a number that didn't work anymore, and that was what finally made her question him. I slid my copies of the letters across the table and scrolled through the texts where I'd set the deadlines, and where he'd promised things he never did. She read in silence and then put her card down on the counter with the cashier and told me to tell them whatever the total was for the phone payoff. We called the carrier together. She paid the $524.97 in full and had the line transferred out of my name before we left the table. On our way out, she reached into her tote and put the Puffco on the table between us. "He's not getting this back," she said. "And I'm sorry." I believed her. The next week, Animal Control knocked on my door because my ex had filed a complaint saying I'd abandoned Zeus. I handed over the surrender paperwork, my emails with the shelter, and the texts where he ignored every deadline. The officer looked at the stack, thanked me, and said he wouldn't be following up further unless something new came up. He looked almost relieved, like he has these calls too often and they never come with something so cleanly documented. 2 weeks after surrendering Zeus, I got an email with the subject line Zeus update. The foster wrote that he was finishing his ear meds like a champ, that he slept curled up on a blanket under their kitchen table and had a habit of carrying his food bowl around after meals like a trophy. She attached 2 pictures. In one, he was sprawled on a couch with a bandana on, ears soft instead of red and angry. In the other he was on a muddy trail, tongue out, looking more dog than problem for the first time since I met him. The foster asked if I'd be comfortable with them adopting him permanently. I said yes. I didn't need to meet him again to know he was where he should be. Things got quiet after that. My neighbors stopped leaving notes about the noise. I started sleeping through the night. The repo letter came with the deficiency amount and I set up a payment plan I can actually manage. The ticket got reduced once I went to court and showed the proof I'd been the one who set the appointment and paid the fee for the defensive driving course. My apartment smells like lavender laundry soap again instead of bleach and dog. On Sunday, I cooked without glancing at the kennel every 5 minutes, because there isn't one anymore. I ate at my own table, in my own quiet, and when I went to bed, nothing was waiting for me on my porch. Update 3. 3 weeks after things finally went quiet, my phone rang at 5:41 a.m. It was Zeus's foster, whispering and steady in that way you get when you're scared but trying not to make a mistake. Their motion light had flipped on. A man was at the back gate calling Zeus's name. Her husband yelled and the guy bolted, knocked over a recycling bin, and clipped the curb backing out. They'd already called 911. Their camera caught his face and the plate number clean enough to read without pausing. I told her I hadn't given anyone their address. She believed me. I got off the phone and sent an email to the shelter's manager with the timestamps and a short version of everything leading up to that morning. By lunch, a detective called me. He'd watched the foster's video and compared it to the clip from my porch at 1:13 a.m. with a late-night knocking. Same guy, same hoodie. The plate came back to his sister. He asked if I'd be willing to sign a statement. I drove to the precinct after work and read it out loud twice before I signed. "We'll handle contact," he said when I asked if I needed to warn anyone. "You don't reach out to him. If he reaches out to you, you forward it and that's it." The shelter flagged Zeus's profile with a safety note and moved his vet recheck to a clinic the foster hadn't used before. They also bumped up the adoption. The foster and her husband had already decided to keep him. Now it was just a matter of paperwork and getting the microchip updated. The manager called me herself to say they'd be making sure no one other than the registered owners could access anything. I exhaled like I'd been holding my breath since November. 2 days later he was cited for criminal trespass at the foster's home. The detective called again and said they were adding a charge for attempted theft because of how he'd tried to coax the dog. It was petty and mean on paper, but the only word I could think was reckless. The detective asked if I'd considered a protection order. I'd filled out the packet once and never filed it. I went to the courthouse on my lunch break with a folder that's become a reflex, printouts, texts, the video, stills, and the judge granted a 1-year order with a no-contact clause. I listed my apartment, my car, and my workplace. The clerk asked for a service address. I didn't have one. She shrugged and said they'd try the last known and then usual haunts. They found him faster than I thought. He'd started working nights at a distribution warehouse on the industrial strip by the freeway. I know because the process server called to confirm he'd been served on the loading dock and read me the name of the company off his badge while I was standing in the frozen foods aisle picking out broccoli. I went home, pulled up my case, and filed the paperwork for wage garnishment within the hour. A week later, an envelope showed up with a stamped copy of the writ and a note from the employer's payroll, first deduction to process next pay period. The number was small, $86.19 after exemptions, but it was real. It hit my account the following Friday. It was the strangest relief, like closing a cabinet that's been hanging open for months. He tried to get around the order the dumbest way possible. I got a DM from a brand new account with no name, a single blurry picture, and a message that started with "Tell your friend to check her backyard before I do." I forwarded it to the detective and then sat on my hands. The detective rang back an hour later. "We warned him this morning," he said. "He just violated. Thank you for not responding." He picked up a second citation for violating the protective order. The detective's voice sounded tired, the way you get tired when you've told someone exactly where the line is and he steps over it in front of you anyway. His mom called me again after that, soft voice like before. She told me she'd taken his keys and her car and was done being triangulated. She'd already made him move his stuff out of her garage. She brought a grocery bag with the leftover mail he'd had sent to my address, 2 pre-approved offers, a flyer, and a crumpled pay stub from the warehouse. I stood in my kitchen and wrote return to sender, not at this address on everything, with my hands shaking even though nothing in the bag was dangerous. She asked me if I wanted the TV back. I told her it was his and I wanted nothing of his in my home. She nodded like she understood exactly how heavy that sentence was. The day the adoption finalized, the shelter emailed me a copy of the transfer. Zeus's microchip now points to the foster's address. They kept his name because he turns his head when he hears it and trots over like he was never anyone's argument. They'd also added a bright red note on the file: do not disclose owner info to unverified parties. The foster sent me a picture he'd taken on a walk that afternoon, Zeus hamming for the camera with mud up to his elbows, and a second one on the couch, with a new collar. His ears look like ears again and not a battle. I had to go back to court one more time for the debtor's exam. He didn't show. The judge signed a bench warrant for failure to appear and told me, kindly and in public, that I didn't need to do anything else to make the consequences happen. They would happen whether I was in the room or not. On the way out, the clerk reminded me the garnishment would keep pulling until the judgment and costs were paid or he quit. The idea that he might quit just to duck out of owing me and end up paying it a different way didn't make me angry. It made me take a deep breath and go home. My apartment has stayed quiet. The porch camera mostly catches the same cat from 3 doors down and 2 delivery drivers who both leave the packages in the exact middle of the mat like they're following a diagram. I bought a new doormat because mine said welcome and I didn't mean it anymore. Friday night I wiped down my counters, turned on my cheap lavender wax warmer, and ate noodles in peace. The only thing that knocked was the heating kicking on. I slept without dreaming and woke up to my own alarm. No banging, no barking, no phone lighting up with something I didn't ask for. I got dressed for work and walked out into air that smelled like wet concrete and laundry soap, locked my door, and didn't look back. Update 4. 2 Mondays after the bench warrant, a bouquet showed up at my job with a card tucked so deep the receptionist didn't see it until she went to trim the stems. It was in his handwriting. We can fix this if you just talk to me. Tell your friend to bring my dog. I didn't touch it. My manager slid it into a trash bag without taking off the ribbon, tied the top, and carried it to the dumpster like it was leaking. I forwarded a picture of the card to the detective. He called back before lunch. That's a violation, he said. And we still have the warrant. They picked him up at the warehouse 20 minutes into second shift on the loading dock. The detective told me not to check the jail roster if it made me spin. I waited for the voicemail from the victim advocate instead. Arraignment was the next morning. I sat on the back bench under a flickering exit sign with my folder and a bottle of water I didn't drink. He came in cuffed, borrowed suit jacket over a t-shirt, and looked past me like I was a hallway. The judge didn't. She read the order out loud, the dates, the citations. Do not contact means do not contact, she said. Even if you believe you're owed a conversation about anything, including pets. He tried to speak. She raised a hand. He pled no contest to the violation and the trespass. 10 days jail suspended, a year of probation, stay away conditions tightened to 500 feet from my home and workplace, counseling, and a review in 90 days. The clerk shoved a stack of papers across the table at him and told him where to sign. He didn't look at me on the way out because the bailiff stood between us with his hands folded like he'd been there before. The warehouse sent a letter to the court and to me about the garnishment. He'd resigned effective immediately. Payroll said the last check had already been processed. The advocate slid a pamphlet across her desk with a paperclip on it and said, "You qualify for address confidentiality. We can do it today." We did it in a room with bad carpet and a fern someone kept watered. I signed next to a line that said substitute address. The program gave me a laminated card with a state seal and a P.O. box that isn't really a P.O. box. I took an early lunch and stood in the DMV line with that card and my protective order and told a woman behind the glass I needed my address shielded. She took my picture and told me to check my mail in 10 business days. By dinner, I'd updated my bank, my payroll, and the landlord. I slept with the card under my phone. The foster texted me a screenshot at 9:17 p.m. 3 days later. A post on Marketplace with Zeus's picture, the one with the bandana from the couch, and a caption that said rehoming due to moving. Small fee to ensure good home. It was his account. The shelter called the police again and sent a takedown notice to the platform with the adoption paperwork attached. The post disappeared in under an hour. The detective added it to the file and told me there's a name for it when you try to sell something you don't own. It wasn't the big charge he probably thinks it is, but it didn't help him. The foster changed their privacy settings and moved their dog pictures into a locked album. Zeus spent the weekend rolling in the kind of mud you only get after a long rain. They sent me a video of him galloping crooked down a trail with a stick so big he had to lift his chin to carry it. I watched it twice and then put my phone face down on the couch like that could make the world quiet. He tried one more angle. A money request popped up from a new payment app I don't use with a note that said settle this and I'll stop. I took a screenshot and blocked the sender. The advocate emailed the probation officer. I didn't have to go in for the review. They called it in chambers and sent me the summary. He tested dirty for THC, missed a check-in, and had to sit 3 days on the violation. His mom left me a voicemail the night before he went in. She was clipped and dry. I told him he can be mad at gravity if he wants, she said. It will not make the ground stop being the ground. The civil side kept moving in its slow, dumb way. Because he quit, the garnishment paused. I filed for a bank levy with the routing information off the crumpled pay stub he'd left in my mail and the name of his credit union on the envelope. The sheriff's office sent a notice of levy. 2 weeks later, my account showed a deposit with a reference number I didn't recognize. $62.13. It was nothing and it was something. The clerk at Small Claims told me to mark it on the ledger and that interest would keep ticking whether I was thinking about it or not. I stopped thinking about it until the envelope with the stamped interest sheet arrived, and then I put it in the same drawer as the spare keys and the title to the vacuum. On a Saturday I wasn't waiting for anything. I went to the shelter and sat through a volunteer orientation in a room with folding chairs and a whiteboard that still had cat names in a column and different color check marks next to intake, medical, behavior. They handed me a lanyard and a spray bottle and a roll of dog bags with a rubber band around them. I walked a senior pit mix whose note said likes to sunbathe and wary of strangers. She walked me instead, slow loop around the back lot, then stopped in a patch of light by the fence and leaned her whole weight into my shin like a person falling asleep on a train. At the end I signed my initials on the clipboard and drove home with my windows cracked even though it was cold, and my car smelled like clean fur and the lemon cleaner they use on the floors. The only court date I had to appear for was the restitution hearing for the Foster's gate. The slats he'd knocked out when he ran were $40 each, 3 slats and a latch. The Foster brought the receipt, hands shaking a little even though the thing that should scare them had already happened and nothing else did. The judge asked them one question and asked him none. He was there in a collar shirt someone else ironed, staring at a spot on the table. The order was signed and the bailiff called the next case. It was quick and, somehow, kind. A week later the first piece of mail to my substitute address forwarded through. It was my new driver's license, the one with no street on it, just the program lines and the star. I put it in my wallet and cut the old one in half over the sink. I pulled the new doormat a little closer to the door when I got home. It's blank, heavy rubber, no message at all. The porch camera caught the same neighbor cat doing its slow patrol, then the wind lifting the corner of a pizza box on somebody else's balcony and dropping it again. Inside, the air smelled like basil because I'd put a plant on the windowsill of the kitchen and it likes the afternoon sun. The heater rattled once and settled. I answered no calls. I poured pasta into a pot and let it boil and left the door locked behind me without thinking about it, not even once. Update 5. The envelope was bright green and hand addressed like a birthday card, but it was certified and came with a little pink slip the mailroom made me sign. Inside was a small claims complaint with his name at the top and conversion of personal property scrawled in the cause of action box, plus a copy of Zeus's shelter intake photo stapled to it like that proved anything. He wanted the return of chattel or the monetary value of same and damages for emotional distress, which in his math was the kind of number you make up when you think decimals make it look official. The hearing date was a Tuesday at 8:30 a.m. I took the morning off and wore the same blazer I wore to every other room with a judge in it. He was already in the hallway when I got there, rocking heel to toe in sneakers like he was lined up for a concert. He avoided looking at me the way kids think you disappear if they don't make eye contact. The clerk called our case, and a woman with a lanyard that said Humane Society stood up from the back row and introduced herself as their operations manager with a letter from their counsel. I hadn't asked them to come. They'd found the case on the docket because I'd emailed them the complaint when it hit my inbox, and they'd taken it from there. He tried to talk first. The judge stopped him and asked for proof of ownership. He shrugged like proof was a vibe. The manager slid forward a thin stack, surrender paperwork in my name with his text messages attached, vet records with my address and the notes about the untreated ears, microchip transfer confirmation to the foster turned owner, and a copy of the statute that says animals are property for purposes of transfer but that surrender to a shelter is lawful when the owner of record signs. The judge read every page. He asked my ex again if he had anything. Microchip registration, licensing, bills in his name. Nothing. He asked him if he'd filed the right action if what he wanted was a dog back. The word replevin hung there like a rope he couldn't climb. Even then, the judge said, the animal is already adopted and the shelter wasn't a party he could drag into small claims for custody, and he still had no standing. He tried to pivot to asking for the adopter's address. The judge leaned back like he'd sucked on a lemon and told him this wasn't discovery and we weren't doing that. Complaint dismissed. Costs to me and the shelter if we filed them. He stood there like the air in the room had changed and then walked out with his empty hands the way you do when you forget your wallet. 2 days later, the shelter's attorney filed a motion to quash a subpoena he'd had delivered to their front desk like he could strong-arm the adopter's info out of a teenager making kennel charts. The judge signed it in chambers. The shelter added another flag to Zeus's file and a quiet note went out to all staff. Do not release anything to anyone not listed as owner of record. The manager called me from her car after court and apologized to me for being dragged into it. I told her thank you and then sat in my parking space with the engine off until my hands stopped buzzing. He tried to go around the order again in a way that would have been funny if the paper with my name on it didn't exist. I came out of work at 6:22 p.m., dusk sliding down the side of the building, and a woman I didn't know was perched on the low wall by the parking lot planter, smoking and texting. She looked up and smiled like she knew me and said, "He just wants to talk." He said, "You won't answer." I held my phone at my chest and hit record. "You can tell him he's violating a court order right now through you," I said. "I'm calling the police. You should leave." She blinked the way people blink when they realize they're about to be part of paperwork. She stubbed the cigarette on her shoe and left without looking back. I sent the video to the detective and the advocate while I was still in my spot. He picked up a third citation the next morning for indirect contact. The probation officer added a condition to his terms that included no third-party contact with protected party. It felt like drawing a box around something that had already been boxed and then, finally, someone locking it. The 90-day review hit faster than it felt like it should. I didn't have to go. The advocate called after and read me the bullet points: missed counseling twice, failed to check in, the indirect contact, the attempt to get at the adopter info through the court, which the judge took as evidence he didn't understand what stop means. 10 days jail imposed from the suspended sentence. Report by 7 p.m. or a pickup order. He showed up 10 minutes before the cutoff and they took his shoelaces. I made dinner and ate it standing up and then sat down because I could. He was out the following week with the same conditions, extended another 6 months. The clock is a circle and a straight line at the same time. On the civil side, I filed my costs from his suit in the morning I'd had to take. It wasn't much. The clerk stamped it and said the interest would add to the judgment like a shadow you don't have to think about. The bank levy coughed up another odd little deposit, a refund from the payment app he'd tried to bait me on, reversed by their fraud department, $28. $47 less their fee. It hit on a Thursday and I grinned at my computer screen like a kid. I marked it on the ledger and folded the paper and put it in the drawer with the spare keys. On a Saturday with sun after rain, I did my second volunteer shift at the shelter. The senior pit from my first day saw me and wagged like she was surprised and pleased in the exact same measure. Her kennel card had a new line in blue pen: "Loves canned green beans." We made a mile of slow loops behind the building and then sat in a square of light by the fence and watched a sparrow get brave on the chain link. At the end, the coordinator asked if I'd ever considered fostering. I said I worked a lot. She looked at the schedule and then at me and said, "Some of them like quiet more than constant." I drove home with a crate in the trunk and a bag of food in the back seat. The dog came the next day, a blocky mutt with a white muzzle and a habit of sighing like an old person settling into a bath. I didn't change her name because it fit her. She slept under my desk while I paid my bills and learned exactly where the afternoon sun hits my living room rug. At night, the apartment sounded like an apartment and a living creature breathing and nothing else. He tried to file to modify the protective order a week after he got out. The form was bare and his handwriting worse than usual. He wrote that we had shared property disputes outstanding and that he needed to reach out to resolve phone, TV, Puffco, dog. The judge set it for hearing. I took a 2-hour block and sat on the back bench again and put my folder on my knees. He started to speak and the judge asked him what had changed since the order was issued. He said he had things to say. She said that wasn't change, that was the thing the order stops. Motion denied. She extended the order to 2 years without me asking and he looked up like he hadn't read the part where the court can do that on its own. When we filed out, the bailiff stood in the doorway and made a tiny pivot with his shoulder that put his body between us. I went to my car and turned the key with both hands, not because it was hard, but because it felt like I was turning something bigger. His mom called me 3 days later. I let it go to voicemail and listened in my kitchen with the faucet on. Her voice was clipped and calm. She'd filed her own order after he'd pounded on her door at midnight and woken up the neighbors. She'd also taken his name off her phone plan and told him to lose her number. "I told him I will love him and I will not be used by him," she said. "If you need anything for court I will show up." I sat on the floor with my back to the cabinet and cried in that way you do when nothing is wrong in the room you're in, and everything else still happened. Zeus's adopters sent the shelter a picture for their newsletter, which is a 2-page PDF that goes out to donors and volunteers and has more emojis than seems legal for a nonprofit. The operations manager forwarded it to me with a tiny thought you might like this. Zeus on a bed that looked like a boat, snoring, paws in the air, a little bit of drool on his lip, new collar bright against fur that looked like fur again. The caption under it was 3 words: "He is home." I closed my laptop and stood at the window and watched rain hit the street in diagonals and thought about how long I'd been holding things I wasn't supposed to keep. I did have to think about money one more time. The Department of Labor sent me a photocopied page that looked like it had been faxed in 2001, notice of wage and hour complaint closure from the warehouse where he'd worked and quit the day my garnishment hit. Attached was a list of people with unpaid final checks. His name was circled. I called the number at the bottom and a woman told me, bored and efficient, that when those get posted, creditors with judgments can file to grab them. I filed the same day. 3 weeks later I got a check for $114.22 with a stub that said unclaimed wage, my case number handwritten in the memo line. I deposited it in the lobby ATM and felt ridiculous joy watching it swallow the paper. I texted the case number to myself so I had it in 2 places and then put the stub in the drawer with the vacuum's title. It's a slow drip into a bucket, but it's the kind that fills even when you sleep. He did the dumbest thing after that. A letter showed up at my substitute address and forwarded through, no return address, his hand like he'd tried to write left-handed to disguise it and forgot halfway through. We need to meet one time in public, it said. I will be civil. The advocate sent it to the probation officer and the detective. He spent another weekend in jail for the violation. The judge didn't look up when she signed the order, she didn't have to. The instruction had been the same since the first time. Do not contact means do not contact. I walked at the shelter the afternoon he turned himself in. I took the old dog around the side lot, past the chain link where the ivy tries hard every spring. She chose her son and leaned full weight against my shin again, and we stood there a long time and didn't say anything. When we got home, she made a nest out of the blanket I'd set on the couch and sighed that bath sigh and drifted. The apartment smelled like basil and wet pavement, the wax warmer I keep at the edge of the counter humming low and steady. My porch camera caught the neighbor cat doing his slow route, then nothing. I made dinner without watching the door. When I sat down, I didn't look out the window, not once. The knock from the heating system came on a minute after the burner clicked off. I laughed out loud at it like it had told a joke. I ate at my own table, with my own dog asleep and my phone dark, and when I got up to wash my plate the water ran warm right away. I locked the door without thinking and went to bed and woke up to my alarm. I opened my eyes and had to remind myself the thing that felt strange was the quiet. It's still strange. It's also mine.